We as a gathering of Wounds Australia acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Today we meet on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land. We pay our respects to all Aboriginal people and families past, present and future who nurtured this land. Finally, we celebrate Aboriginal culture with all its strength and resilience. We acknowledge the memory of their ancestors and we extend respect to all Aboriginal people who may be present today.
My name is Helen Jentz and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Wounds Australia, and I'm really excited to have here with me today for our big launch two incredible advocates who are both at the forefront of championing improved prevention, diagnosis, treatment and healing of wounds, not only across Australia, but across the world. Firstly, our Wound Awareness Week National Ambassador, Professor Fiona Wood, 2005 Australian of the Year, world-class surgeon, burns and wounds expert, and all-around amazing person.
Thank you very much.
Equally incredible, with over 20 plus years working with and advocating for patients living with wounds to ensure they receive the best possible treatment and care, Ms. Hayley Ryan, Chair of Wounds Australia. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Helen.
7 years ago, Wounds Australia, the national not-for-profit, specifically established for the prevention, diagnosis, treatment and healing of wounds, made the bold decision to establish Wounds Awareness Week. Hayley, what prompted us as the long-standing not-for-profit in this space to take on such a monumental task?
Yeah, and it's a really big task, right? It is really Australia's hidden epidemic. What we know by the statistics is around 420,000 people are affected by a wound. This is a problem, not only for the person themselves, but also the budgets. We think about it, it costs around $3 billion to actually treat a wound, which is around 2% of the health expenditure. So we have a real problem on our hands. We really wanted to focus as well on how do we support the consumer or the patient on their journey? How do we get healing rates that happen at the normal trajectory? And more importantly, how do we prevent wounds from happening? So there's some of the reasons.
Fantastic. Now, Hayley and Fiona, you both know that I'm not a healthcare professional, but I do have a good head for statistics. And as Hayley just mentioned, there are 420,000 Australians living and suffering with a chronic wound. And these figures are similar to other top health priorities here in Australia. But wounds are not considered a top health priority. And they're also not a specialisation, a medical specialisation in their own right. Can you give me some idea as to why, given they affect the largest organ in the body, which is the skin?
I think it's fascinating, isn't it? Because in my world with burn injury, everybody knows you're burnt, that's it. And we've sort of added to the body of knowledge worldwide that you only need a small disruption in your skin for the whole of your body to be affected. And then you stand back from that and you see, well, we have over 400,000 people across this country, which is a significant number. And I think they're hidden in different specialties as well. There's primary care, of course, but then in the dermatology clinics, in the rheumatology clinics, in the vascular clinics, in the diabetic clinics, they're all hidden away. And we need to bring that together, say yes. If you have a heart failure, everybody knows it's your heart. Yeah? If you have a problem with your kidneys, everybody kind of knows that. Well, the skin's no different. And when the skin fails, then we've got a problem, which is what we're talking about. And so we need to sort of gather everybody together, and that's what awareness is about. Yeah.
And Hayley, you work with wound patients. How hard is it for them to get the right diagnosis, the right treatment? And does this form part of the fact that this is a hidden epidemic and people just don't know about it?
Absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head. It's about getting the right diagnosis at the right time by the right person. And so what we know is that people want to help themselves. Even as a child, you'd fall over, you get up and your mum fixes your wound. As we get older, we want to manage it ourselves. The problem is sometimes those wounds get a lot worse. And so that's when we should be referring on to specialists to support, but we know that that doesn't always happen. So what we hope, particularly around Wound Awareness Week, is we need to bring this awareness, number one, to our consumers, to our clinicians. How do we grow the knowledge to actually build capacity to support people to know what to do and how to actually find those experts, because that can also be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fiona, you mentioned all of those various specialisations that wounds goes across. I imagine from a layperson's perspective, it's really important at the very beginning to get that correct diagnosis, advice and a treatment plan within the primary healthcare setting.
Absolutely. I think we know that we know certain things like nutrition, infection, all these things actually impact the trajectory. So let's have a think about those up front. Let's have a think about how can we have an educational sort of guideline, which is in our plan to say, right, let's think, these are the things we need to tick off. These are the things that we need to make sure are optimized, because then we'll close down the problem. I mean, chronic wounds become chronic after about a month. Well, let's not get there in the first place. That's the smart way to go forward. And so that means education.
So in terms of wounds, what are the major, and I don't want to just simply categorise them, but I imagine in the medical space there are categorisations of wounds, and depending on the sort of wound you have, would depend on what sort of advice, diagnosis, treatment you need. So how does that impact upon the person who has the wound, being able to recognise, oh, I've noticed I've got something, on my leg that probably doesn't look so right. What are the steps there that they should be taking once they identify something like that?
Yeah, well, I think Fiona kind of touched on it there. So if it's not healing within about 4 weeks, it's time to go and get it checked. Now, whether that starts with your general practitioner or another medical professional or an allied health person, such as podiatrists, dietitians can even support as well, that's when you need to start looking. Now, the problem is people don't usually know, well, what are the signs I need to look for? So think about, does the wound have an odour? Is the fluid leaking through onto the dressing more than usual? Am I starting to see redness around the wound? These are real key signs that it's time to really go and get it checked. And you know what I always say, use a bit of the gut feeling. If you really feel like it's not going right, just go and get an expert opinion.
Great advice, I think, for everyone. And this is part of what we're trying to achieve with Wounds Awareness Week, is to get people to understand a critical area, I imagine, that is the focus of a lot of where we should be targeting a lot of our prevention activities is our more senior Australians. Would I be right in assuming that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Generally over the age of 65, we start to see, and the reason is because the changes to the skin, right? So we spoke about the organ being the skin, the largest part of the body, and you've got to protect it. As we age, we get real pathophysiology starting to change. We get thinner skin, we start to wrinkle, unfortunately, and we get all these changes. That means that the skin breaks down a lot quicker. Now, if that happens, it means they're going to be more prone to wounds. And unfortunately, the other reason is sometimes as we age, we start to lose balance a bit more, so we might bump into things. So there's lots of other problems that come with it. So the answer is yes.
And also the healing rates, our capacity to heal as we get older in any body system is influenced, but specifically in skin. The sort of the engine room starts to kind of slow down.
Yes.
So Fiona, what sort of innovations are happening in the wound space in terms of research, progress, anything you can give us a heads up on?
Oh, well, I think there is so much. This is where I could talk to you, turn to dust, because I think there's opportunities across the whole continuum. I think there's opportunities for us to capture images and even use digital health to really bridge this gap, so that people can get the advice in a sort of easier way, and we can standardise the advice using machine learning, image analysis, and so artificial intelligence and things like that. But So that's on one stage. That's practical. We've got a big problem. We've got a limited sort of resource with respect to the practitioners. So how do we bridge that gap so that we make sure that the right people get through for the expert advice, but we drive that prevention as well. And so I think we need to use technology in that space. But in the other end of the spectrum, I could talk to you about the cells within the wounds and how we can enhance that, how we can use different drugs to enhance our bone marrow so that our bone marrow responds in a different way so that we can get the cells into the wounds. And then we look at the whole dressing systems and the opportunity for infection control and smart dressings. And smart dressings is something that I'm very passionate about. We're working with different groups around the country with NHMRC grants, looking at how we can measure pH with diamond nanoparticles embedded in dressings, and that will give us an indication of whether there's infection in there. So there's a lot on the horizon, but basically we've got to have the solid foundation. There is no point icing a cake when the cake you've pulled out of the oven is flat because you've kept opening the door, you know? You keep opening the door, the cake collapses, but no worries, we'll cover it in ice anyway. I kind of know.
Yeah.
We need to bake the cake. We need to get that right. And then the exciting research is really important.
Fantastic.
There's been so many advances over the last 20, 30 odd years. You know, we're really moving in the right space. But if anything that has come out of COVID over the last 2.5 years is telehealth is the way of the future. So moving towards that digital platform, yes, we know that we need to get into these wounds and have a good smell and really review it. But telehealth is going to reach those people like rural and remote communities that don't have access to specialists. So it's the way of the future.
But it's interesting. There's a thing we're just starting with as a thermal camera. You can click onto your iPhone, and there's different sensors you can put on an iPhone. And so you can actually get the information about the smell and the information about the heat.
That's incredible.
Without actually seeing, feeling, and being in the room. Yeah. And then the things like the Google Glass, you know, sort of those remote glasses types technologies, a number of people. It's not just Google, but and so then you can actually have somebody in the room linked with a specialist. You know, so it's an exciting space to be in.
Wonderful. So obviously, the message is prevention first. We really need to drive prevention, which is what Wounds Awareness Week is all about. But there's some amazing things for us to be looking forward to in terms of how we do that diagnosis, get the treatment right, and then ultimately, which is the key to all of this, is healing.
Yep.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure if you've noticed, but we've actually been joined by someone equally as special as the both of you today, and incredibly important in terms of raising awareness around wound prevention and management and treatment and healing. And he's new to the Wounds Australia family. So I'd like to introduce you both to Uzi T. Wound, who you can see at the back of us. Now, Uzi is incredibly important to Wounds Australia and our Wounds Awareness Week campaign. So I think it's important you get to know a little bit about Uzi. So Uzi's your typical Leo. He's loyal. He likes to visit new places. He can be a bit stubborn and hot under the collar. And Uzi does sometimes outstay his welcome, but is a little bit misunderstood. So I'd like everyone to welcome Uzi T. Wound to the Wounds Australia family. Now, we have an amazing chock-a-block week for Wounds Awareness Week 22. So Hayley, what can everyone look forward to this coming week?
There is a lot going on, but I'd actually appeal to everybody watching today. It's about how are you raising the wound awareness message? How are you getting out there and talking to people? How are you sharing the stories about chronic wounds? And so anything you do over this week, and I guess I'm talking a lot to the clinicians, but maybe even some patients out there, share your stories. You know, drop something on your any social media. Make sure you use the hashtag Wound Hero and tag Wounds Australia as well. And I'd implore you all, we've got Uzi behind us, but let's have a bake-off on Friday. I believe that's what we're going to be doing, and bake the most Uzi foods you can come up with. Why? Because we're raising awareness. Naturally, you're going to do it in moderation, but this is about bringing awareness to the forefront.
Absolutely. So on that note, I would like to thank Professor Fiona Wood, Ms. Hayley Ryan, for an absolutely phenomenal launch to Wounds Awareness Week 2022. As Hayley said, everything in moderation. We all love an oozy donut or a good old chocolate eclair. We want that awareness to be raised this week. We want everyone to get involved and really enjoy Wounds Awareness Week, but really get an understanding of why it's so important. Prevention, correct diagnosis, correct treatment and healing. So on behalf of Wounds Australia, thank you. Wounds Awareness Week has officially begun.
Excellent.
Excellent, thank you.